Dion win.
Hi everyone, welcome back, maybe for the very first time, and it's been quite a while since I dropped one of these videos, but might as well start 2022 with a So You Want to Get Into video. And this is a series dedicated to the directors of world cinema that you may or may not know about, the best entry points into their filmography, what makes them so special, discussing a little bit about their background, about their style, what makes them so prominent and memorable, and why you should watch their films. And so far we've discussed the work of Simon Lang, Hong Sang-soo, Claire Denis, we've done Kelly Reichardt, we've done Abel Ferrara, Kiyoshi Kurosawa, Nagisa Oshima, loads of filmmakers, and this time we are talking about somebody very special, and that is Pedro Almodóvar. Almodóvar is one of the filmmakers that I always look forward to seeing his latest works. As you know, Parallel Mothers was one of my favourite films of 2021, and since his film is out in the UK now, I thought, you know what, it's time to talk about Pedro. And the way we're going to make this video is we're going to be discussing my initial experience with Pedro Almodóvar, the very first film I saw from him and where it went from there. Then we'll be discussing a little bit more about his background, his style, the subtext, and everything that makes Almodóvar Almodóvar. And then I'm going to give you 3 recommendations into the filmography. The first one will be the most highest ranked film on Letterboxd, or the masterpiece right now. Then I will be giving you my personal favourite film of Almodóvar. And then I will be discussing an all-rounder, everything that we discussed in the video that kind of encompasses what Pedro Almodóvar is and why you should watch any of his films. Anyway, enough introducing, let's get talking. So my initial experience with Pedro Almodóvar was around 2011, 2012 with The Skin I Live In. And this was a film that kind of came at a good time for me because this was when I was beginning to kind of write about film and trying to kind of figure out, okay, I don't really necessarily think I should be writing about major films. This is kind of the road I need to be taking. But at this point, I had no clue who Pedro Almodóvar was. I knew Antonio Banderas was in this film, and I was like, okay, Antonio Banderas in a Spanish film. Again, not very well educated at this point, did not really know that he had a background in, you know, Spanish cinema or anything like that, even though I know obviously his origins and things like that, but I just know him for very generic American movies. Anyway, and then The Skin I Lived In was kind of one of those films that I thought to myself, okay, this has got Eyes Without a Face vibes and everything like that, but really when I went into it, I thought, wow, this is clinical filmmaking, this is very cold, very pastiche, but it's a really interesting observation about beauty and femininity. And I think coming from a male filmmaker at this point even, I thought to myself, this is quite audacious because there are elements of it that I found to be really profound, and this kind of feminine essence that Almodóvar is so well known for is kind of ingrained in this. And while I don't think The Skin I Live In is a film that you potentially would start as an entry point, it was quite a unique one for me, but I thought to myself, it was kind of relevant to me kind of understanding Pedro Almodóvar is pretty special. And then obviously I knew about him when it came to films like Vulva or Broken Embraces. I'd seen them in the Oscars because I was watching the Oscars at this point, but I just never really went into that road. And this is the joy about Almodóvar, especially in this period, is that so many of his films are accessible via DVD. And during this time, before streaming was even big, I thought to myself, okay, we'll start digging through, and I saw films like Bad Education, Dark Habits, and I just was like, wow, this guy is pretty special. And for me, going from there, I just thought to myself, I have to watch all of his movies. And I'm more or less there, but a lot of the earlier ones I struggle to watch or try to find. Now to the style and subtext of Pedro Almodóvar, and the best way to do this is to go all the way back to his childhood, because to understand Almodóvar is to understand his early upbringing and the experiences that he had as a child and as an adolescent. And he was raised in Franco Spain, which was obviously a very disgusting time for Spanish people during a reign of tyranny and a lot of murder, a lot of repression, and a time where people were just unsure how life would go. Almodóvar was actually sent to a private school where he was hoping, well, his family were hoping for him to train to be a priest. That obviously never happened. And these kind of two elements are really focal, I think, to kind of watch his films. You see it particularly in films like Dark Habits or Bad Education, Pain and Glory. You see it in Parallel Mothers, you see it in all of his films. I think there's essences of his upbringing in there. And also the idea of how much he loved his mother and his siblings. And I think his kind of exploration of womanhood is so crucial. But as Almodovar grew up, he actually moved to Spain. He actually wanted to learn how to become a filmmaker, but obviously Franco had closed the filmmaking schools down, so he was never able to actually professionally learn. But all the best filmmakers never go to film school anyway. And I think Almodovar really had this chance then to kind of explore more. He bought a Super 8 camera, started working on little short films like called Homage or The Star. These are all films that I've never seen, but I would always love to be able to see them someday. And once the Franco regime came to an end after his death, this is kind of where Almodovar became himself and became a crucial part of the art scene in Madrid. And he was part of La Movida Madrilena, which was a massive arts movement, I think, which kind of evoked so much of what Spain was about during the 1980s. And this was then the time where Almodovar made a lot of films to kind of look at various perspectives. But in this time, he made films like Pepe Lucky Bon, he made films like Dark Habits, Labyrinth of Passion, he made What Have I Done to Deserve This, Matador of Desire. He made so many films in the 1980s, but he was allowed to express himself. And I think this was a really kind of busy period for Almodovar. But this is the thing, I think even from the very first film that we have is Pepe Lucky Bon, you see that he has a really keen eye on the female perspective. And I really like this kind of, it's a caper in a way, but I think it's kind of done in such a different kind of take, and even with kind of less resources and not so fancy kitchens just yet, you kind of see what he was about. Obviously, he worked with his muse Camemwera, who is a massive part of Almodovar's filmography. I think she made 8 films, I think, with him, or 7, I can't remember now, but it will come to me later. And I think as this kind of discussion continued, you then get to see a lot more of who Almodovar was. I think particularly when we hit kind of like Dark Habits and Matador, those are the kind of the 2 films that really kind of show a different side to him. And as I've mentioned, Dark Habits is kind of a really interesting exploration of religion and how he kind of denounces the church in so many ways. And I think it kind of shows this kind of disdain he has. But the female perspective is what Almodovar's known for. I think anytime anybody would say to you, I think he's one of the best male directors that writes for females, and I think his actors agree with him, academics agree, I think critics, everything about him kind of encapsulates this. But he has actually said himself that he finds stories from the female perspective to be more richer, more entertaining, and I think when it comes to the Almodovar pastiche or the oeuvre of him, yes, 100,000%. There are so many dimensions to all the characters that he has, and I think when it comes to the males, it's not always the same. I think obviously bar films like Pain and Glory and Bad Education, the male characters are not always interesting at all, and I think they're more kind of focused on what's for dinner and why my shirt isn't ironed and all this kind of things. But I think this kind of sense of understanding empathy and kind of connecting with the female experience is why he's so popular. And I think his popularity has kind of grown because of this, but I think it's such an important part of him. And you see it in all of them. All About My Mother, Woman on the Verge of a Nervous Breakdown, Talk to Her. You see it in Tie Me Up, Tie Me Down. All of them have just fascinating stories to tell, and they never feel the same, and they're so kind of refreshing and so different. And ultimately, Almodovar, when you see a Almodovar film, you know it's an Almodovar film. Another characteristic that is really important to understand within Almodovar's work is melodrama, the kitchen sink element of it, because I think he has a really fine balance of drama, comedy, humor, and I really kind of enjoy these various elements. As I've mentioned, he's a self-taught filmmaker. His influences are people like Hitchcock, Cassavetes, 40s, 50s, 60s cinema. You all see this in everything that he creates. The lighting, everything about it just creates this kind of ambivalent essence of what vintage Hollywood cinema is, but set in Spain. And as you kind of explore these kind of melodramas, it allows you to absorb the narrative a lot more. And I think Almodovar is a master when it comes to this. I think his observations of reality and fiction are something that are so poignantly etched within a lot of his work. I really do love that. I know I reference Pain and Glory a lot. It's mainly because it's not on my kind of recommendation list, but I think Pain and Glory is a perfect example of this because it is basically a semi-autobiographical film about Almodovar's life, which I really found to be really touching and moving, but also kind of that elevated essence of the melodrama of what is not real is deep inside it. And you know, I think his understanding of LGBTQ narrative, of being a homosexual, his exploration of transgender stories, I think are just absolutely fascinating. And this is a filmmaker that was freely making work during a time where the AIDS crisis was rife, and during a time where homosexuality wasn't always open for discussion. And I think he's an openly gay man himself, and it's never been an issue, and I think that's how life should always be. And I think the way that he just makes everything so inclusive and not exclusive is what I love about him so much. And I think melodrama within all of his films is something that I love and admire so much about him. Production value and mise en scène also are massive focal points of Almodovar's work. This kind of sense of flamboyancy that makes it so striking. The importance of colorization is really kind of crucial to understanding him as well, because colors represent a lot of what's going on within the tone, within the mood, of what potentially might happen. Obviously, when you see red, there's a lot of red in Almodovar, and you know that there's something brewing, there's going to be some kind of death, there's going to be some kind of blood splatter or anything in this kind of manner. And that's what I love about him, is that it's kind of a representation of a kind of hidden meaning, and there's like a lot of hidden meanings within a lot of his work. And I think he really is the king of mise en scène, I think, within European cinema. I think his setting, his lighting, the music, the characters, everything kind of derives into something so rich and so profound. I just love just sitting there watching his characters in center frame, as everything that is so beautifully flamboyant are surrounding them, and these kind of hidden topics are just etched within it. And this kind of exploration of tradition, the past, the present, there's always this kind of element where he fuses Spanish traditions inside his placements of things. I think kitchens, for example, sometimes you get these beautiful kitchens of IKEA standard, and then you still have like this essence of traditional Spain, where you have the old pots and pans or ceramics, or kind of you have food hanging everywhere. I love that essence of him, because he's a very proud Spaniard, but sometimes he kind of has to revisit his past to understand his present. And I really love this kind of essence that we have through all of his films. It's really kind of crucial. And as I've said, his kind of upbringing has been such a fundamental part of his filmmaking. Not all filmmakers channel personal experiences, and I'm not saying every film of his has a personal experience to it, but when we kind of look more into it, and I think the further you read about Almodovar, the further you get to understand that he's a very personally touched filmmaker that really wants to express what he's feeling at different periods of his life. And I think this scattering of time is something that I absolutely admire, and it's something that more people should be considering, because I think this is the thing about Almodovar films sometimes, is that people don't always necessarily understand what he's going for. And unfortunately, I do think he is a filmmaker that does require a bit of reading about sometimes, because it's not every time he's going to connect with you, and that's a shame. And this is one of the main reasons I wanted to make this video, is that there is a lot to his history that I'm not going to discuss about, because I don't see the point in it, because do your own research. That's how I see it. But this is just a flavour of what he's about. But womanhood, mise-en-scène, production value, melodrama, kitchen sink, everything kind of comes together and makes something so special in the Almodovar films. Now then, to my recommendations, and the first one is the highest ranked film on Letterboxd, the current masterpiece according to Letterboxd users, and that is All About My Mother from 1999. 1999 was a stellar year for cinema, as we all know, and this one was one of those films. And I think this is a massive ode and homage to motherhood, womanhood in general, and I think it is such a deep, difficult exploration of grief, the loss of a child. And the weird thing about this one is it kind of never hit me the first time, the impact that it had on me, and I think as the days and weeks went by, it grew further and further into my mind, and looking into it a lot more. And that's what I loved about it so much. Obviously, it is a multi-award winning film. A lot of people do regard it as his best film. And I love so many elements of it. But this is, again, within such a difficult subject matter, it has a nice balance of melodrama, which, again, is something that we've discussed today. And it's something that I really think was needed for this narrative, because it cannot be all doom and gloom, and it's kind of rebuilding a life without somebody significant within it. And I think this is one of Penelope Cruz's best films with Almodovar. She made 7 films, and other people have worked with him so much, like Antonio Banderas, who's had Camamara, we've had Jocelyn Pereira. There's so many of these people that have been so important, because it is a family production for him. He works with a lot of the same people all the time, and that's what I love so much. But within All About My Mother, I think this was kind of 20 years into his kind of filmmaking career, and to make such an important piece of cinema, I think that really needs to be watched by more people. I don't think I ever hear that many people talk about it, which is kind of odd. I don't know if it's because it had so much exposure back in the late 90s, early 2000s or not, but it's really important and something that I would highly recommend you to watch. Now to my second choice, and my personal favourite of Almodovar's work, is Bad Education from 2004, my favourite Gael Garcia Bernal performance ever in a film. I think Bad Education is a really personal film for Almodovar, and as I mentioned, it really explores kind of his early life and his sexual awakening. While this is not an coming out film at all, it really just shows him kind of talking a little bit more about his upbringing and a little bit more about how he realized that he was gay. And I really found that to be fascinating, and I love this sense of a confession. This is obviously a religiously heavy film at times, and it kind of denounces what has happened in the church, but also this sense of Catholic confession that kind of engrosses this narrative is really great and really fascinating. But this added element, I think, and this was the point where I realized that time was so important to Almodovar, was that he really explores how time changes people, but our histories kind of unite us, or they kind of not define us, because history cannot define us, but what our upbringing or what our past can bring to us. And this kind of lineage is really important to him. And I think this is a really interesting precursor to Pain and Glory. Again, I will talk about Pain and Glory as much as I want, because I fucking love that film. But regardless, I think they're great parallels together. And Bad Education is a film that so many more people need to watch and admire, and to understand more about Almodovar. Now then, to the all-rounder and my final choice, and it has to be Women on the Verge of a Nervous Breakdown from 1988. And this one is just chaotic energy. It's short, it's impactful, it really combines everything about Pedro Almodóvar. I think within kind of this time frame, this was about 10 years into his career, he really was in his stride, I think, with this film. It's a fine balance of, again, the melodramatic elements that he's so well known for. It's a feminist black comedy, again, something that I really love, the rich mise-en-scène of it, this sense of kind of building a kitchen sink drama around something so kind of tumultuous and really kind of engaging. And I know a lot of people connect with this film so much, and this is why it is the all-rounder, because I think it's about 88 minutes in length. It's impactful. It shows you everything about Almodovar. Every kind of element and essence of what we've discussed today is within this film. And I think Carmen Maura is one of my favorite performances from her in any of Almodovar's films. And because she's such an influential, a really important part of his kind of background and filmography, I really just had to say that this one is kind of that kind of epitome of why he works with so many people like he does. And I truly, truly, truly think that this is the best way for you to go into a Pedro Almodóvar film. No question of a doubt. So many of his films are available on Mubi, on Criterion Channel. You can stream them online so easily. There's so many DVDs, Blu-rays, mainly from Studio Canal in the UK. He's so accessible and he's so worthy of your time. I think he is a modern master. He is truly an auteur, which is a word that gets used a lot, but wholeheartedly he is. And I hope this video has kind of helped you understand a little bit more about the master that is Pedro Almodóvar. So thank you very much for watching this video, and I will be back very, very soon with more reviews because it's been film festival season already in 2022, so check it out. Thank you so much for watching this today. I hope you're doing well. Like, share, subscribe, do as you please, and let me know what your favorite Pedro Almodóvar film is in the comment section below, because I always like to hear what you guys think. So take care, and I will speak to you soon. Bye bye.